Thank you, Sharon. Good morning. It's a great pleasure to stand before you and to convey on behalf of the Board of Directors of the National Writing Project our greetings to each of you. I'd also like to express the board's gratitude for the extraordinary work each of you does each day. We look forward to participating in a day full of learning in this really rather surreal setting, in the midst of what is surely the most dedicated, accomplished, and generous-spirited community of professionals I have ever had the pleasure of knowing or could imagine. What a glorious occasion to be in the pleasant and productive company of so many gifted and skillful writers, teachers, and masterly teachers of writing. It is not surprising that the intellectual energy in this room is already amply palpable. This same intellectual energy turns on, lights up thousands upon thousands of young minds in this nation every day. I would also like to say that it is a singular privilege and honor for me to speak to you for this final time as the chair of the Board of Directors of the National Writing Project. I trace my roots in NWP to my years teaching at Queens College in the City University of New York in the previous millennium. Throughout the all too few years of open admissions in the early 1970s, when Richard Sterling, Sandra Pearl, John Brereton, I, and many other colleagues had the exquisite experience of working with and learning from Mina Shaughnessy. The conversations of those years informed much of our work that followed. And along with Jim Gray's inspirational vision for the NWP, eventually served as the impetus in 1978 for Richard, Sandra, John to join with Marcy Wolf and Elaine Avedon to establish the New York City Writing Project. My association with the board of the NWP dates back to Richard's arrival at UC Berkeley in 1993 to succeed Jim Gray as the executive director. Since that time, the National Writing Project and the board have traveled a long and remarkably successful and suddenly now an arduous path. Yet because of the professional strength and the intellectual integrity each of you contributes to the NWP network, we can reasonably look forward to competing successfully for federal dollars, as well as to earning the support of major foundations and civic-minded philanthropists. The leadership of the national office, led by Sharon Washington, and including Judy Buchanan, Elise Eidman-Eidal, Linda Friedrich, Patrick Sweeney, Susan Freundlich, Marilyn Lovelace Grant, and Dan Tormey, continues to focus on assisting the network to adapt to the new normal in competitive federal funding. The NWP management team continues to work in tandem with the board of directors to assess the deployment of your now far more restricted resources, as well as to recalibrate expectations about the support the national office can and should provide to sustain and strengthen the vibrancy of this remarkable network. Like each member of the board of directors and the management team, each of you here this morning, and scores of colleagues who couldn't be with us today, has reaffirmed our collective resolve to push forward against many odds and in the face of an assault on the importance and dignity of the work each of you does so well in your classes each day, on behalf of our collective belief in a fully educated and participatory democracy. Over the course of the past 2 years, nearly a dozen presidential candidates began to excoriate each other during a marathon run of what I have counted to be 56 primaries and caucuses, competing to be the non-MIT. Nearly $2 billion was spent by the Romney and Obama campaigns over the past several months, supplemented by another $625 million and counting in super PAC funding on both sides of the aisle. More than 1 million television ads crowded the airwaves, along with millions upon millions upon millions of words of speculation, analysis, opinion, and partisan dissembling. What more compelling evidence can we summon for the need for more purposeful expenditures of funds on education? Many times over the course of the primary and general election, I thought of William Butler Yeats. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, and the worst are full of passion and intensity. It will not surprise you to hear that I found no solace in these lines from Yeats. They remind me, however, that there is an alternative to education. It is catastrophe. The disinvestment in education and in our youth in many states across the nation is more than frightening. It's disgraceful. But this is not the time to be discouraged. This is the time to persevere and to continue the work at hand. Our strength is the NWP network. As I complete my service as the board chair, I encourage you to reflect and act on what Dr. Martin Luther King once said, that the arc of the moral universe is long and that it bends towards justice. What Dr. King also knew was that the arc doesn't bend on its own. The teaching that each of you does each day helps to bend that arc toward justice. On behalf of the Board of Directors, I urge each of us here on this bright morning, at the start of a day of listening and talking and learning and teaching, I respectfully urge each of us to renew our shared commitment to bending that arc toward justice. To bend that arc toward justice, toward access and excellence for every person who calls the United States of America home. Access and excellence are not contiguous. They are not separable goals in and of themselves. Access and excellence are continuous, not contiguous. And that continuity, that intellectual rite of passage, is a fundamental educational principle and a democratic right in a truly just and democratic society. My final duty and pleasure this morning is to advise you that following this meeting, my distinguished colleague, Judith Warren Little, Dean of the Graduate School of Education at UC Berkeley, will assume the responsibilities of the chair of the Board of Directors. Judith Warren Little is an outstanding teacher, researcher, writer, and educational leader. Her research interests center on the organizational and occupational contexts of teaching, with special attention to teachers' collegial relations and to the contexts, policies, and practices of teachers' professional development. In pursuing these interests, Judith attempts to balance attention to the daily life of schools, the search for locally situated meanings, identities, and relationships, with a broader view of the larger social, institutional, and policy environments in which the work of teaching resides. Judith Warren Little is admirably qualified and fully prepared to serve you and the best interests of the writing project. In closing, I would like to say that it has been an honor and a privilege to serve you and the students and the work you do so selflessly and successfully each day. I'm also grateful to my colleagues on the board for their support and encouragement and their faith in me. As I pass the leadership role to Judith, I urge each of us who collectively constitute the National Writing Project, to keep faith in what Dr. King lived and died for. His belief in both the arc of the moral universe, but also his faith that it bends toward justice. I encourage you to practice faith in your teaching and learning, and in your students and in each other. Faith is, as I've come to understand, a readiness for surprise. The principles and practices of the National Writing Project embody that belief in the arc of a moral universe, and in the readiness for surprise as that arc bends toward justice. I wish you continued and great success in all that you do each day on behalf of your students and our nation.